Hello, welcome back to Genesis Protocols. My name is Dr. Martin Gentry. Today we're going to be discussing pre-diabetes and insulin resistance. Pre-diabetes is a silent killer which most people don't know they have. According to the CDC, 38% of the US population has pre-diabetes. That is to say, 126 million people have pre-diabetes, and yet they have no idea that they have pre-diabetes. And pre-diabetes is a very chronic condition which, if untreated, can lead to diabetes, which can lead to kidney failure, which can destroy your nerves, destroy your eyesight, and lead to amputations, neuropathy, and a whole host of chronic complications. And therefore, prediabetes is something that we should take seriously. In addition to that, prediabetes is a perfectly reversible condition, and that is why we should not suffer from it. So now the next question is, what is prediabetes? Prediabetes is a condition in which your blood glucose level is high, but not high enough to be diagnosed with full-blown diabetes. The diagnosis is conducted using a lab that is referred to as fasting plasma glucose or fasting blood glucose. That is, after a period of fasting, a typical example, an overnight fast, blood is drawn, and then the level of glucose in the blood is determined. Under normal circumstances, in a healthy individual, the blood glucose after a period of fasting should be less than 100 milligrams per deciliter. If the blood glucose is above 125, 126 and up, then one is diagnosed with probable diabetes, which is confirmed eventually with another test called the hemoglobin A1C. So if the blood glucose is above 126, confirmed with the hemoglobin A1C of 6.5% and up, then you are diagnosed with diabetes. But if the fasting blood glucose is between 100 and 125, or a hemoglobin A1C of 5.7 to 6.4, then one is diagnosed with pre-diabetes. So in terms of diagnosis, that is how pre-diabetes is diagnosed. But like I said, pre-diabetes is a chronic condition which, if not treated, can lead to the eventual diagnosis of diabetes. And most people have no idea that they have pre-diabetes until one day, all of a sudden, their doctor tells them that you have diabetes. And then it comes as a shock to most people when they receive the diagnosis of diabetes. Meanwhile, the process of prediabetes takes decades to develop. It takes 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years before one develops prediabetes. And then after one has developed prediabetes, it takes between 3 and 5 years after that to develop full-blown diabetes. That is why if there is anything we should do or anything we can do, we have to do it in the period of the prediabetes to reverse it so that we don't go on to develop diabetes. So now that we understand what diabetes is and how it is diagnosed and what it can lead to, the question is, what causes prediabetes? According to the CDC, there are certain risk factors which lead to prediabetes. The first risk factor is age greater than 45 years. This is commonly referred to as a risk factor, but technically speaking, age by itself is not a risk factor. Age becomes a risk factor if the lifestyle through the ages has been such that it promoted prediabetes development. There's a lifestyle factor which makes age becomes a risk factor. Risk factor number 2, according to the CDC, is family history of diabetes. If there is a family history of diabetes in the mother or the sibling, brother, sister, then there is a risk of developing prediabetes and eventually diabetes. Once again, family history alone is not a risk factor because, once again, family history always goes with a lifestyle. Families have their own lifestyle which they pass down the generation, and that becomes something that is inherited. So families inherit genes and they also inherit lifestyles. Risk factor number 3 is a history of gestational diabetes. Gestational diabetes is diabetes that is diagnosed during pregnancy. Some women develop diabetes when they are pregnant, and then after the childbirth, the blood sugar goes back to normal. So they are only diabetic when they are pregnant. So if you have had a history of gestational diabetes during pregnancy, then you also have a risk of developing pre-diabetes. The next risk factor, according to the CDC, is inactivity. If you have a job that requires you sitting all the time, that doesn't require any movement or physical activity, or you don't make time in your life to consciously exercise or do some physical activity, that is a risk factor for the development of pre-diabetes. The next is race. According to the CDC, being of Black race, being African American, or being Hispanic or Latino, being Native American, Pacific Islander, or Asian American is a risk factor. But once again, like I keep repeating, race alone is not a risk factor. Race becomes a risk factor when there are certain practices that run through the races, certain way of cooking and eating and living, which is passed throughout the members of that race. This is what makes race a risk factor. But race in itself is not a risk factor. And this has been supported by science because there have been research conducted in Black people living in the US, African American people, and in Black people living in Africa who live like native Africans. And the diseases which are attributed to race, which are found commonly in Black people in the US, don't exist in Black people in Africa. Therefore, race alone is not a risk factor. There are certain lifestyle parameters that make race a risk factor. And then according to the CDC, the last risk factor to the development of prediabetes is being overweight. Being overweight is a risk factor for development of prediabetes because there is an element of fat involved in the development of prediabetes. Today, we are just beginning the series on prediabetes. In our next video, we'll go into more details to look at the mechanism, to look at what exactly is happening. So keep tuned. Now, if you have been enjoying this video so far, please like, click, and share. And stay tuned. At the end, I'm going to give you a bonus item that is going to help you to reverse your prediabetes if you have one. So now, let's begin to ask ourselves, how does prediabetes happen? So in a normal functioning body, after you eat food containing carbohydrates, the food is digested, converted to glucose or sugar, and then it is absorbed into your bloodstream. After the sugar is absorbed, insulin is secreted by your pancreas. And insulin's function is to open the cells of the body. So insulin functions like a key, which opens the doors of the cells so that glucose should be taken up, will be absorbed into the cells for the production of energy and for the process of metabolism to go on. But in some people, the cells don't respond to insulin like they should. It's like having a key that cannot open your door because somebody put wax in the keyhole. And that is what is referred to as insulin resistance. And therefore, because the glucose cannot move into the cells, the blood glucose level goes up. And then the body thinks that maybe the insulin is not doing its work properly. Therefore, the pancreas secretes more and more and more insulin in an attempt to force the blood sugar into the cells. Therefore, people with prediabetes have high blood sugar and high blood insulin. Eventually, the insulin is able to force the sugar into the cells, then the blood sugar becomes normal. And that is why most people go for so many years without detection. But if you ask your doctor to test your hemoglobin A1C, then prediabetes can be caught very, very early and it can be reversed. Therefore, insulin resistance is the process which leads to prediabetes. Now, what causes insulin resistance? Insulin resistance is caused by fat cells. They have conducted a research where they have fed one group of people high carb, high sugar diet for weeks. and none of them developed prediabetes or insulin resistance. And then the second group was fed a high-fat, low-carb diet, and almost every single one of the high-fat, low-carb diet group developed insulin resistance or prediabetes. Therefore, clearly, research has answered the question, what causes insulin resistance and prediabetes? It is fat. Therefore, fat is what is responsible for clogging the cells, the liver cells, the cells of the muscles, the cells of the pancreas, the cells of the fatty cells in our body, what is called the adipose tissue. All of those don't respond to insulin, and that is insulin resistance, which leads to prediabetes. So what can you do to reverse prediabetes if you have one? Simple. One, your diet has to change. Your diet has to move towards plant-based. I'm not advocating that you should become a vegetarian or a vegan, but your diet should move towards plants, and so that 80% of your food, of your nutrition should come from plants. Unrefined, unprocessed whole grains, vegetables, fruits, which are very high in antioxidant and phytochemicals. These prevent oxidative stress, which is one of the processes that leads to the development of insulin resistance. So a high antioxidant, high phytochemical food like fruits and veggies, legumes, nuts and seeds like walnuts and almonds and pistachios, which are very high in omega-3 and monounsaturated fatty acids. These actually prevent insulin resistance from happening. And then seeds like pumpkin seeds and flax seeds and chia seeds, which are very, very high in fiber. Fiber binds to fats and lipids and prevents them from clogging the cells, and therefore prevent insulin resistance, which then prevents prediabetes, which then prevents the development of diabetes. And then the next thing to reverse prediabetes, according to what research has found, is to try and lose 7% of your body weight and exercise 2.5 hours per week. Just 2.5 hours of moderate to intense exercise, aerobic exercise like brisk walking, running, swimming, bicycling is enough to activate, to optimize the cells of your body, your muscle cells, your liver cells, the cells of your pancreas, the cells of your fat tissue, to make them insulin sensitive again. So these are very, very simple steps that can be done to reverse pre-diabetes. And then I promise you a bonus if you have been listening up to this point. And what is that bonus? It is a simple compound extracted from many plants. It is called berberine. Berberine is a very potent compound that has been tested in lifestyle medicine, in natural medicine, and it is potent. It's been shown to reduce fat absorption, to augment the body's metabolism of fat, cholesterol, and prevents the clogging of cells. It has been also shown to increase the body's insulin sensitivity. Therefore, as you do all these and you make all these lifestyle changes, you can add berberine, which is a very healthy and very, very safe plant extract to your lifestyle. And that is how you reverse prediabetes and insulin resistance. Thank you, and see you next time. And as always, I wish you optimum wellness.